Yá'át'ééh, binna. Good morning, my relatives. It is barely a binna. It's still barely morning. It's 11:59 here on the East Coast, and I wanted to start with today. I'm sipping here my second cup of coffee. Hold on just a second. I have a mic problem going on. Let me fix this. But yeah, I wanted to talk with you. Sorry, today this is a little things, few glitches here going on in the studio, but wanted to talk to you today over my cup of coffee regarding sleep. I've been reading some articles, and as you know, I've been using my watch, my Fitbit, my Google Watch, to track my sleep more recently. And I wanted just to have a bit of a discussion about the importance of sleep and um, just some studies I've been reading out on about sleep. But before I do get into that conversation, I want to do as I always do, which is acknowledge I'm speaking to you from Piscataway lands. It's now called Washington, D.C., but I want to honor and acknowledge that the Piscataway are the host peoples of these lands. And I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to continue to remind all of us to remember the importance of understanding and knowing the history of the land where we're living and the people who are indigenous to those lands. Before we jump into this discussion on sleep, and again, I'll just introduce a little bit. As you, if you've been following me on social media for a while, you know, I've talked before about the fact that I am a morning person, as you can probably guess by the fact that I love to watch the sunrise. But I'm also a very big extrovert, and which one of the ways my extroversion manifests itself is that I don't like going to bed when there are people who are awake I can still talk to. So I usually need to be the last person in my family to go to bed, which has been a bit of a problem as our children have gotten older and the teenage years. But also, like, if I have friends, moving to the East Coast was hard because I have friends on the West Coast, and it was easy to call them late at night and have a conversation because they were still in the middle of their evening. And so anyway, I'm a morning person by nature, but I can easily stay up late at night if there's people to interact with. And I like to kind of wind down at night after everybody's in bed. I like to take at least 20 minutes to an hour to just kind of wind down and do my own thing and think about things from the day and maybe even do some journaling. And so I kind of have a more solitude wind down experience, which means for most of my adult life, I've been operating on between probably 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night. And I want to just have a discussion about that. But before we do, let me see who's on right now with me and see who else has joined this cup of coffee. Mary Yá'át'ééh, Binna, thanks for joining from Arizona. It's good to see you here, Mary. Haven't seen you in a little while. I know your schedule can be a little busy at times, but it's good to have you here. I also see Tim, or Tina, sorry, Yá'át'ééh. Tina, thanks for joining. Good morning, and thank you for sharing your morning cup of coffee with me. But yeah, so before we get into the discussion about sleep, I want to talk a little bit about what has been one of the things dominating our headlines, which is this comment that President Vladimir Putin made the other day, basically warning that Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons if Russia's sovereignty is threatened. He made this in an interview a couple of days ago. He made this comment in an interview, and he said things like this before, especially with the Ukraine war. And he's basically been warning other nations not to send soldiers into Ukraine, or definitely not into Russia, in their efforts to aid Ukraine. And he has threatened that if he feels his nation is threatened, he will not. He will consider using nuclear weapons. And right, our country, every single time we jump on our bandwagon and say, how dare you talk this way? You're a nuclear power. You're threatening nuclear weapons and nuclear war. That's irresponsible, blah, 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 right? We say that all the time. And what's fascinating about that is our presidents talk and act the exact same way. right? If you remember back in April of 2017, when President Trump was in office, our military dropped what we call the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. It's the largest non-nuclear weapon that we have as a country. And in April 13 of 2017, we dropped it for the first time in military combat on another country, in Afghanistan. And this was in response to a terrorist attack, right? That happened 16 years ago, prior to that. And we were still fighting a war regarding that. And then, if you remember, I want to remind you again, just so we don't think this is only a Republican problem. And actually, Donald Trump, and they had already removed the need for a presidential authorization of that bomb, and that was actually that authorization was no longer required even before President Trump came into office. So it wasn't even like he was doing that, but this is just something our military has the right to do. We've given them the right to do that. But if you remember also during Joe Biden's first year in office, there was another terrorist attack in Afghanistan, and several of our service members died. And I talked about this before. It was at an airport in Afghanistan in 2021, and this is President Biden's first year in office. And if I said Obama before, I apologize. I meant President Biden. This is President Biden's first year in office. And in response to that terrorist attack, he gave a speech. And this is exactly what he said. To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command. Every measure at my command includes nuclear weapons. And remember, we're the only country in the world that's ever used nuclear weapons on another nation during a time of war. Now, I'm not saying it's not irresponsible for Vladimir Putin to talk this way. It absolutely is. But if we want to act like we are some high and mighty nation who has integrity to handle our nuclear weapons better, we're wrong, right? We talk this way all the time. Plus, we have the history of we've actually used nuclear weapons. Oh, and just for fun, right? Literally in that same speech Joe Biden was giving, the very same speech, he went on to say, those who have served through the ages have drawn inspiration from the book of Isaiah when the Lord says, whom shall I send and who shall go for us? And the American military has been answering for a long time, here am I, Lord, send me. Here I am, send me. So not only did Joe Biden say that he would be willing to use nuclear weapons against our enemies, he then pretty much pronounced the American military as the army of the Lord that was responding to a prophetic call on par with that of Isaiah the prophet. Which one sounds more scary, right? A nation that's already dropped nuclear bombs and says we're willing to do it again, and we consider ourselves to be the army of the Lord to do whatever we want to do, right? We have no integrity to call out the reckless speeches of Vladimir Putin. Not that they shouldn't be called out. They absolutely should, but we are the worst country in the world to call them out, especially regarding nuclear weapons. So let's just not pretend. Let's stop pretending that we're some high and mighty voice of integrity and morality in the world regarding nuclear weapons. We're not. We lost that integrity at the end of World War II when we decimated Japan with our nuclear bombs. Anyway, this may be one thing that might be disrupting your sleep. So let's talk for a few moments about sleep. As I said earlier, right, I for most of my adult life, I've probably been sleeping 5.5 to 6 hours of sleep a night. And I function fairly normally on that amount of sleep. I know it's not healthy. I've known for a long time, right? They recommend you should be getting between 7 and 9 hours, or most Americans get they recommend that people get between 8 and 8.5 hours of sleep a night. And sleep is very important. The REM sleep restores some things in the chemical balancing in your brain. It helps you fight diseases. It keeps your memory sharp. There's so many benefits to sleep. One of the best definitions I read about sleep was actually in a Wired article that I'm going to read a little bit later. But in that article, this is what they said. They said, if you think of the body as a machine, sleep is the after hours maintenance crew. I love that because that's literally what sleep does, right? It goes through, it kind of washes your brain in this chemical, and it clears out some of the waste that was produced through normal brain activity the day before. You resort your memories, you restore your memories. I mean, I've known about the benefits of sleep for a long time, and I've used them to my advantage, right? I know when I talk about the trauma of white America, when I go out and I speak about the horrible things our nation has done and the things we've done, I know that triggers my white audiences, and they go into a fight or flight mode, and they're experiencing a multi-generation and communal manifestation of a perpetration-induced traumatic stress. And I know they're very, very close to being triggered and going into that fight or flight mode. And I'm also very well aware that if I can keep them in my lecture without leaving and without going into a full triggered response, that once I can get that information in their head, and then they go home and they sleep that night, their brain will begin to sort through those memories. They'll begin to sort through what they've processed. They'll have some better thoughts and better responses to that than they will immediately right after. As a result, I stay at most of my speaking presentations at least 2 days if I can. I like to stay a second day after I speak at a major conference, primarily because I know almost every question I'm going to be asked that first day is going to be some kind of triggered response to what I've said coming out of their trauma. And the next day, after they get some REM cycles in them and their brain processes a little bit of what they've heard, they will have a better and a deeper level of questions the next morning. And so, right, I know the benefits of sleep, and I know I haven't been getting enough sleep. And so this past year, I've been working very hard to increase the amount of sleep I get per night. And it's working. I'm probably getting closer to 6 hours of sleep a night than 5.5. I've done that by having a more consistent time I go to bed every night and a more consistent time I wake up every morning. I'll be honest, in even this past year, my daughters, because of their school schedule, I'm not able to watch the sunrise in the mornings because my daughters, I need to take my daughter to school at 7 a.m. and my other daughter at 8. And so I don't have time to go out to watch the sunrise. And so I've actually been able to sleep a bit longer in the morning, and I'm working harder at getting to bed earlier. I've finally broken the midnight level. I'm now getting in bed between 11:30 and 12 every night, and getting up usually between 6 and 6:30. Sometimes I'll sleep as late as 6:45. But yeah, these past few weeks even, I've been getting an average of about 6 hours of sleep a night. But what I've been noticing as I'm sleeping good and consistently is that my body doesn't sleep more than 6 hours a night, right? Even when I have time to sleep 7 or 8 or 9 hours at night, my body doesn't. I usually wake up after I've been asleep anywhere between 5 and 6 hours, and I'm awake. I'm ready for the day. I feel refreshed. My brain's working fine, and I'm ready. And I've found it challenging to sleep more than 6 hours of sleep a night. And I was beginning to wonder if this is going to be a problem. Like, are there things I need to be aware of, and what does, because they talk about, right, even if you get an hour, 2 hours of less sleep a night than you need, below 7 hours of sleep, that can cause some challenges for you mentally, and it can even lead to things like other conditions like Alzheimer's and things later in life. That's one of the reasons I've been trying to get my sleep in a better pattern is because I want to make sure I can keep my mind alert and useful as I'm getting into my 50s and eventually into my 60s. But I found this article a couple days ago. I was reading this. It's from a study back in 2017 or 2019. And I want to share the article with you. The article's in Wired. And it came across my feed, and it caught my eye, and I decided to investigate it a bit more further. And the article is titled "A New Gene Helps Explain Why Some People Need Less Sleep." And in this article, they're referencing a study, and I'm going to share the link to that study with you. The study was in the Science Translational Medicine, and the study was titled "Mutant Neuropeptide S Receptor Reduces Sleep Duration with Preserved Memory Consolidation." Basically, what this study found is that there is a genetic mutation in some of people's genes. I think it's 1 out of 4 million people, where they actually can function normally on less than 6 hours of sleep a night, between 4 and 6 hours of sleep a night. And they found that these people do not have any of the other issues that other people have when they have reduced amount of sleep. And due to being able to look at some of these mutations in the genes, they found that they were essentially sleeping more effectively. And even though they were getting less sleep, which meant they were getting less REM and less deep sleep, they were still able to keep their brains clean and process their memories correctly. And one of the authors of this study was a Taiwanese professor who's working, I think, at the University of San Francisco now. Her name is Ying-Hui Fu. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And in this Wired article, what they said is Professor Fu suspects this mutation helps people sleep more efficiently. If you think of the body as a machine, sleep is the after-hours maintenance. Cerebral spinal fluid washes over the brain during sleep, cleaning out waste products like beta amyloid and toxin protein linked to Alzheimer's that is created by normal brain activity. People with a mutation appear to be doing that cleaning much more efficiently. And so I have no idea if I'm one of these people who have this mutated gene or not, but at least it helped me understand some of my sleep patterns, or at least maybe even give me a probable explanation for why I can't seem to sleep more than at the most 6.5 hours of sleep, right? I think there was one day last year, all of last year, since I've been tracking my sleep, that I slept over 7 hours. And that was when I had COVID. And I slept for 10 hours one night. And I didn't sleep well, but I did sleep for 10 hours. But most of my sleep, since I've been tracking it since last summer, I've been averaging between 5.5 and at the most 6.5 hours of sleep a night. And I just wake up feeling refreshed after about 6 hours. And even after about 5 hours, I usually wake up feeling refreshed. I can generally sleep a little more if I want to, but I feel fairly decent. And so this study put my mind at ease a little bit. Now, if you read studies about sleep, you'll also know that most people, right, the vast majority of people need between 8 and 8.5 hours of sleep a night. And there's been studies that show that the average American sleeps less than 7 hours gets less than 7 hours of sleep per night. And it's not that Americans just have a plethora of these people with these mutated genes. We just have a lot of really bad sleep patterns, whether it's working too much, whether it's not being able to disconnect from our work, whether it's the stress that we experience, whether it's being on our screens constantly, or drinking alcohol too late at night, or having sporadic bedtimes and sporadic wake-up times. We do a lot of things as people, as Americans, that disrupt our sleep. Probably one of the worst things is the amount of TV and screen time that we have, especially late at night, as well as alcohol consumption that takes place just before people go to bed. All of those have been demonstrated to give you a lower quality of sleep. And so I still want to encourage people, do what you can. If you're not sleeping at least 7 hours of sleep a night, do what you can to get on a consistent sleep schedule. Do what you can to cut your screen time off, turn your screen time off an hour to 2 hours before you go to bed. If you like to drink alcohol or a glass of wine in the evening, do what you can to not drink any too late in the evening, as that will disrupt your sleep. If there's things that you're processing, take some time to kind of process through your things, or find a way to emotionally and kind of mentally give yourself an outlet for some of those thoughts and those emotions. And try to have a consistent bedtime. Try to get to bed at a regular time every night, and try to have a good wind down process that gets you winding down and gets kind of your brain disengaging from the day so that you can get some sleep. But if you're doing all of that and you still can't get more than 7 hours of sleep a night, or you're getting even less, 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night, but you're still functioning fine, and you feel like you're getting through your days, you're not like a walking zombie, or you're forgetting things or things like that, then maybe this study is something to help you, to just at least put your mind at a little bit of ease, like it's doing with me. Again, I don't know. I don't even know if there's a test they can give you to see if about this, but I found this article encouraging, because I've literally found I can't sleep more than 6 hours at night, even if I try, even if I have the time and I want to, my body just wakes up. So here's another study that I'm sharing, or another Q&A that was done with Professor Ying-Hui Fu. Just some of her thoughts and some of her work around sleep. And then I'm going to share two other articles here from one of the national agencies or governmental agencies, just giving some ideas on sleep. Here's a page about why sleep is important. And this is another page about how much sleep is enough. Sleep is very important. And even as I was reading about this, they were saying, despite the fact that people spend a third of our time, a third of our lives, right, 8 hours a day on average, we spend a third of our lives asleep. We've actually done very little research comparatively on the importance of sleep and what happens in sleep and what happens if we don't get enough sleep. And so I want to encourage you to take your sleep seriously, right? If you want to be better at your job, if you want to have healthier relationships, if you want to be more productive, don't sleep less. Now, occasionally you're going to need to pull the late night work session or the late night study session, or do something else, but don't do that as a pattern, because if you sleep less on average, that will take a toll on the quality of your work, on your mental alertness, on your ability to kind of function throughout the day, and it will have a negative impact on you. So yeah, as a society, we tend to devalue sleep. And I just want to remind us, sleep is very, very important. And it's something that we need to make sure we're at least giving our bodies the opportunities and the ability it needs to sleep, and to make sure that we're setting that time aside and winding our brains down, our bodies down effectively, so that we can get as much and as highest quality of sleep as we can. Anyway, those are my thoughts, my relatives. I hope these things are helpful. I appreciate everyone who is joining me with your cup of coffee this morning. Next week, Tuesday, I'm going to be talking about this book I've been reading. And we've been promoting that online, but I've been reading through this book about Rosa Parks, and I want to make sure that you remember I'm going to be talking about it on Tuesday over my second cup of coffee. The book is called The Rebellious Life of Miss Rosa Parks. I started reading this during February because of Black History Month, but I allowed my finishing of the book to spill over into March, because this is Women's History Month, and Rosa Parks' story is not only about the fact that she's Black, but part of the challenge with her story and with her not getting the recognition that she deserves comes from both the fact that she is Black and she is a woman. And so I've decided to and B, because this book is one that brings out emotion in me, and it was not a quick read, so I've been taking my time to kind of read through it. But anyway, I will have a discussion on that going on my second cup of coffee next week, Tuesday. And so I invite you to join me for that. But thank you all for being here today. I hope that you have a great weekend. Walk in beauty, my relatives. And before we go any further, let me share a few more things with you. I just want to give you a link here, if I can. And one of the things that I'm trying to highlight more is my Patreon. And I'm using my Patreon as a way to support my work. I don't monetize my YouTube channel or my other social media, but I do use Patreon as a way to keep my voice as independent as possible. And once a month on my Patreon, I have a Q&A. And it's an open Q&A. It can be I can ask questions about my book or about things I've spoken about or lectures I've given or even thoughts on current events going on, things I talk about over my second cup of coffee. And if you would like to join my Patreon, even if you just have a question 1 month and you don't want to be on it full time, you can sign up for 1 month. And you can join the Q&A. The Q&A tier, the Ask Questions tier is $10 a month. And not only do you get access to join that Q&A with me, it's on a live Zoom call, but you get access to basically 3 years worth of Q&As. Not only just the Q&As with me, but the Q&As I've had with other guests, people who I've interviewed on my second cup of coffee, and we've had more in-depth Q&As with them on there. And you will have access for the month that you're a member of that tier to all of those archive videos. And so there's a lot of resources there. And so if you have a question about things I'm asking about and you want to join me for a live Q&A once a month, I welcome you to sign up for my Patreon and join my Ask Questions tier there on Patreon. Also, if you're interested in knowing whose land you are living on, the resource I share most frequently is this one. It's native-land.ca. It's not the final authority, but it's a great place to begin your research to figure out whose land are you living on, who are the indigenous nation or nations that resided there before those lands were, quote unquote, discovered, and where can you begin to find out more about the people who are indigenous to those lands. Anyway, those are a few things I wanted to share. I hope you all have a great weekend. I hope you have a good time. It's going to be beautiful weather here in Washington, D.C. this weekend. But walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Yahat and go on that.